From the Oklahoman newsroom, you are watching Orange Alert, the basketball edition. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio. Cowboys coming off a disappointing Bedlam loss in Stillwater on Wednesday night, and Nathan Ruiz joins us on the phone to talk a little bit more about that game and others moving forward. Nathan, obviously not the end result that the Cowboys wanted. Had a big lead early and were not able to sustain it. We'll talk about that in just a second. But Gallagher-Iba, you were there. I was watching on TV, but even on TV, looked very lively. Mike Boynton even spent a decent amount of time talking about that after the game on Wednesday night. What was your impression of the crowd and the atmosphere?
Yeah, both by energy and by numbers. It was OSU's best crowd of the season, able to draw over 11,000. And that's always kind of been the case the past few years, even through those down years at the end of the Travis Ford era. They still were able to draw a good crowd for Bedlam and for the KU game. So I think it's kind of a case of that, but obviously it was good to see all the students out there. They were really passionate. They were really fired up. Decent crowd up in the 200 and 300 as well. And that was how Mike Boynton opened his post-game press conference. He wanted to say, before I even talked about the game, I want to thank the fans. And so he even admitted, there's a lot of reasons for them not to come watch this team right now. Obviously, just a week ago, dismissed 3 players. They've lost 3 straight games. They were 6-6 through non-conference play. So I think he makes a fair point when he says that, but he also said it kind of speaks to the pride that people have in this program, the belief they have in it, and kind of just the spirit of Oklahoma State basketball and the possibilities that still exist there. And he thinks that it's a sign that maybe people believe in what he's doing, that people, even though they see what's now an 8-11 record, that they believe in what the possibilities are for this program under Mike Boynton.
Well, I thought it was interesting, like you said, that he opened with that before anything else, because this has been a coach for, anything you want to say about, wins, losses, not getting to the NCAA tournament last year, getting close, how things are going this year. Mike Boynton has been able to really connect with fans, endear fans in a lot of ways. And I don't know about you, Nathan, but after the way Brad Underwood left and everything that came along with that, I didn't know if that would be all that achievable for the next Cowboy basketball coach. And Mike Boynton seems to have done it, even as you said, with the fact that he doesn't have the best product for fans to get out to. How has he done that?
Yeah, I think he's just a really personable guy. He's easy to connect to. He's just a human dude. He's just a regular human being who's easy to interact with, extremely personable, like I said. And like you said, Jenny, after that Brad Underwood situation, Brad was very similar. He was a guy who connected to the Oklahoma State culture in a lot of ways. And then he just spurned the fan base, obviously going to Illinois, where he hasn't had a whole lot of success so far. But Boynton, obviously I think people were maybe a little closed off to the program. So he was fighting uphill, running uphill, and he's been able to kind of start to turn it around in a lot of ways. Obviously, once the product on the court kind of coincides, I think we'll see a big shift in those crowds. But that's a matter of time. He recognizes that. This was always going to be a rebuilding year for this team. They were always going to be young. They were always going to have a challenging schedule, and now it's been made more difficult by losing 4 players, 2 of whom were supposed to be big parts of this team, in Mike Cunningham and Michael Weathers. And so now there's a lot of challenges for this team, and like Boynton said, there's a lot of reasons to not come watch. But he doesn't think that it necessarily is reflecting that when he sees the crowd in Gallagher-Iba Arena. I don't know if that'll still be the case Saturday when OSU hosts alma mater, South Carolina, but I think it's a good sign for him that people are still coming to see this team at this point, knowing that it's having a rough patch, knowing that it dismissed players. If this losing streak kind of extends maybe to 6, 7, 8, then we can do some more evaluations. But for right now, I think he's taking it as a good sign of where his program's at. Yeah,
for sure. And the question of, how do the Cowboys get a win is going to be difficult if what we saw last night is any indication. They had, Nathan, a spate of guys that basically didn't come off the court or only under duress, foul trouble, that sort of thing. Fatigue, it seemed to me, was a real issue. You addressed this, but that's just going to be the reality. They're going to have to play a handful of guys a lot of minutes. How did fatigue, in your mind, play into what we saw in that Bedlam loss for the Cowboys?
Yeah, Lindy Waters was asked directly post-game what kind of impact fatigue had, and he very quickly just said no. That was his entire answer, just no. But it's hard to deny when you look at the numbers. Cam McGriff played the entirety of the game, played all 40 minutes. Thomas Azagua played 37 minutes. Lindy Waters played 35 and a half minutes. They played 7 players, and 6 of them played at least 25 minutes. There are times, where in the second half their offense got stagnant. Guys just weren't moving around as much. They were able to build a 28-9 lead about 8.5 minutes into the game because they were scoring in transition. They were getting quick buckets. They were the more aggressive team, and they got tired and they weren't able to have that same aggression. And so that kind of just seemed to be the case. Cameron Griff was all over the place in the first half, and then he was non-existent basically in the second half, and that's saying something given that he was on the floor the entire 20 minutes of the second half. So OSU needs more from all those guys, unfortunately. It's not going to suddenly change. They did add a member to the roster, but it's not. I don't think that Tanner Taylor, who is a third-year manager who's now part of the team, is necessarily going to be the guy who jumpstarts this program going forward. But obviously they're in a really tough position now where their main three guys of McGriff, DeZagua, and Waters are going to have to play a lot of minutes. Fortunately, they've been able to get nice performances out of Yornay and Isaac Likely in those times. Those guys at least playing a lot of minutes. Neither of them really were that great last night. Isaac Likely finishes 1 for 6 with 3 points. So they're still searching for some answers. I think they're still trying to maybe navigate through some things as they learn how to play with what's basically a 7-man rotation.
Well, and foul trouble obviously can exacerbate issues when you've got such a small roster. Lindy Waters ultimately fouls out last night, but I thought actually the fouling was kept decently in check by the Cowboys, but they have to be obviously aware of that. Have you gotten a sense, Nathan, that Mike Boynton is talking to his guys about, can't foul too much, but obviously you have to occasionally take fouls. It's just the way the game works. Is there a balance to be struck there as it relates to fouling when you've got such a short bench?
I think it's kind of just been part of their conversation all season long, even going back to the summer. Play defense without fouling. That's kind of a basic basketball principle. And I think they have re-energized that conversation a bit, but Lindy Waters said last night, that's something we've been talking about all year. So Mike Boynton has kind of had some zone looks. They've done some 2-3, some 1-3-1. They've tried to do some different things, maybe to play a less aggressive defense, and that's unfortunate because that's so much of what their defense thrives on. And it kind of just stands out in the numbers when you look at points off turnovers. OSU ends up with 21 turnovers, or Oklahoma has 21 turnovers, and it just doesn't. The numbers don't add up for OSU in a way that makes you think that their defensive aggression is really paying off for them. So it's unfortunate because that's really what they thrive on.
Nathan, you mentioned earlier that it looks like the Cowboys have added one of their former team managers is now a walk-on on the roster. We know they had those walk-on tryouts a week or so ago. It sounds like this may be the first, who knows, maybe it's the only, but it's definitely an interesting side note that the Cowboys decided to take a team manager and turn him into a player on this roster.
Yeah, absolutely. I picked up a roster sheet last night, and you see something new, and you see a name that you haven't seen before. It's kind of a bit of a shock. So it's Tanner Taylor. He's a 6'1" junior guard from Emporia, Kansas. Went to Emporia High School. He's been a manager the last 2 years. It sounds like he was a quarterback at Emporia High School and came to OSU originally to try to walk onto the football team as a safety. So OSU doesn't get a football player on the roster, but they get a guy who tried to be a football player on the roster. But he's someone who apparently of the managers is the best basketball player. Having been around the team, he knows the plays, he understands the drills. He's a little more familiar than some of the walk-ons that they maybe were able to pull out of that tryout. Tanner actually wasn't part of that tryout, but they just decided, hey, you have the familiarity that these guys don't. Maybe you can help us. I'm not sure that he'll be a guy necessarily who sees much time on the court, but he's obviously a body who's a little more familiar with what the Cowboys are doing. So it says a lot that the headline had to be written last night. OSU adds student manager to roster, kind of tells you about the shape of this team right now. But I think, again, it's just a numbers case where if you only have 9 guys, you need at least 10 to be able to scrimmage in practice. So it's just kind of a case of them trying to find a way to navigate the situation.
Hey, lastly, before we get out of here, Nathan, you mentioned a little bit ago Cowboys will be back on the court on Saturday. It's Big 12 SEC Challenge Day. South Carolina comes to town, and I'm sure that when this matchup was set, the thought of a good game was in the minds of several people, but none more so probably than Mike Boynton, being a South Carolina alum, a guy that spent some time there. Frank Martin, the coach, knows him well. It's not maybe setting up to look like quite the game that they had thought, but I'm sure that this matchup, at the very least, holds a lot of sway in Mike Boynton's heart for sure.
Yeah, I think he's happy it's in Stillwater and not Columbia.
Yeah.
I think he's happy he can kind of dodge the emotions of this matchup in a lot of ways. It's one that when I asked him about it in the summer, he wasn't too happy with. He gets to negotiate and pick OSU's 12 non-conference games for the most part. Obviously, tournaments kind of have a say in that, but for the most part, he got to have a say in the non-conference schedule, but not in this game. This game gets picked for him. Obviously, he finds it kind of unfortunate that this is the program they got matched up with. He obviously has a lot of connections there, and he doesn't want to have to root for his alma mater. But as he said back when I talked to him about it in the summer, on January 26th, I'll not be a South Carolina fan. And it's a good matchup now. South Carolina is 5-1 in the SEC, probably the hottest team in their conference. So it won't be an easy game for the Cowboys. The Cowboys are staring at what could be a 4-game losing streak, and it doesn't get any easier once they return to Big 12 play. So I think it's a big game for them in terms of momentum of proving, hey, we're down to these 9-10 guys, but we can win with them. I think they still need to prove that to themselves. Obviously, you thought last night might be a game where that happens. They build that 28-9 lead, and they just aren't able to hold it because of that fatigue factor we mentioned earlier. So I think it's a big game for Mike Boynton. I think it's a big game for the Cowboys and a big opportunity for them to kind of get off this rough patch.
All right, we'll see if they can do it on Saturday as South Carolina comes to town again, that Big 12 SEC Challenge game up in Stillwater. Be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.